Hello everyone, hope you're doing alright, hope you're keeping safe, hope you're keeping sane. I want to follow up on yesterday's video really. If you haven't seen it, then pop to the channel, and it's called Top 5 Lies That We Tell Ourselves When We're Gambling. And it's about exactly that. It's about all the lies we tell ourselves when we're gambling in order to excuse our gambling, in order to sort of cover it up to ourselves in a way, but also to help perpetuate our addiction and allow us to continue to gamble long after realistically we should have addressed it, we should have stopped. So I want to follow up that video today with a video about the lies that we tell other people. Now I won't do this in such a structured way. This is basically going to be me sharing my experiences about the lies that I've told people in the past when I was gambling, and most of the sort of the experiences and lies that I talk about in this video I will have used at least once. So you'll get an idea that if you're using these lies, then you're not alone. And that's kind of the reason I'm making this video, is because sometimes we say things and we do things, particularly to other people and around other people, that make no sense and that we berate ourselves for, and we don't quite grasp why we're doing them or what's wrong with us. And to know that if I knew that this was symptomatic of the addiction rather than just something that was exclusive to me, then maybe that would have helped a little way in my recovery anyway. So that's why I'm doing this. I think firstly we have to identify the sorts of people that we lie to in our lives, and I would say we could almost put a blanket over it and say that we kind of lie to anyone we talk to on some level. But obviously the lies that are going to be most harmful to you and most harmful to your relationships are the ones that we tell those closest to us, and also those to whom we have an element of responsibility and we have an element of trust with as well. So as well as your obviously wife, husband, partner, spouse, boyfriend, girlfriend, illegitimate lover, whatever, you have your family, you have your close friends, and you have also people like your boss, to whom you have a responsibility. You have a duty to maintain a sort of relationship with. So yes, you'll lie to most people, and that could be something very simple, like when someone asks you how much money you've lost in the fruit machine in the pub, and you say, I don't know, 10 quid, and you've actually lost 50. Those sorts of throwaway lies we just use to save face, but there are some that are substantially more concerning, and they generally fall into the answer to one of three questions, and those questions could be: where have you been? What have you been doing? And why do you have no money? Or why do you need to borrow money? Or why can't we do X, Y, Z? Where's all your wages gone? And the first one is an interesting one. Where have you been? Because when I was thinking about making this video, it reminded me of a time, or a couple of times to be fair, where I would have left work, and on the way home I would have stopped at the bookies to play the fob tees, or maybe gone to the pub to play the machines, or an arcade or whatever. Basically I had gone somewhere to gamble, and I hadn't been home at the time that I said I'd be home. I'd been home several hours later, and when my wife had asked me where I'd been, I would lie and I would say, I've been in the pub with my mates. Now, normally, if you came home late and you'd sort of try and maybe blag that you were working late, or you had to go and see your parents, or go and run an errand or something. But I was so deep into gambling and so deep in denial and so keen, I guess the word is, to sort of hide this addiction from those closest to me, that I would tell a lie knowing that it would cause an argument. But I'd still rather have that argument about me being in the pub for 4 hours and not messaging my wife. I'd rather her think that, and we have that row, than actually tell the truth. Which was, I thought, one of the most insane things that I did while I was gambling. Was I was telling lies that I knew would reflect badly on myself, because I knew they didn't reflect as badly, or at least in my mind didn't reflect as badly as the truth. And actually, as it happens, when I came out and told people about my addiction, obviously people were a lot more supportive than I anticipated. Not everyone, there were people who just didn't get it, and I totally understand people who don't get addiction. but I had got a lot more support, and if only I had been honest, in the times previous, then I could have helped maintain a better relationship with those around me, because I wasn't lying to them all the time. I was telling the same sort of lies on a different level to sort of friends and associates and people who I were giving excuses as to why I couldn't meet up with them for drinks or go out for dinner, or why I was not, I'd let people down with plans because I was stuck gambling on something. And it's, I think the worst thing as well is I was spending time gambling, and then I was coming home and telling my wife that I was doing something that I'd much rather actually have been doing, and then I'd have to try and remember that lie. So I would say, I'd say, I'd leave work or whatever, and I'd end up in the bookies for a few hours playing on the fob tees, or be on my own in the pub playing on a fruit machine or something. And my wife would say, where have you been? And even if I'd lied up front and I'd messaged her, I'd tell her I'll meet my mate Dave. Even if she might be okay with that, so that it wouldn't necessarily have caused a row on all occasions, but. I'd say, I'll meet my mate Dave and we're just going to go for a few beers. So anyway, I wander in skint and alarmingly sober in my wife's eyes several hours later. And she thinks I've had a great time. She thinks I've had a lovely evening, meeting my friends, chatting shit as you do, watching the football, whatever I told her I was doing. She thinks I've had this great evening, when really I've been on my own the entire time, losing my money, getting stressed out, and not enjoying really a moment of it. And let's face it, quite often we don't enjoy our gambling. We're doing it to fulfill an urge, to scratch a psychological itch, rather than that itch was that scratch was well timed, wasn't it? To scratch an itch rather than to actually, for any kind of entertainment purposes. And then she'd think I had this great time, and then when I did actually want to sort of go out with my friends, it appeared that I'd been out all the time. She, in her eyes, I probably had this wild social life with big groups of friends, and I was always out and about. And to be fair, she never really complained about that. But the problem came is that I had to remember what I told her, because then if Dave called me up and said, "Oh, do you want to go down the pub for a beer?" Well, if it was too close to the last time I saw him, I couldn't accept the invite, or I'd have to lie again to sort of justify why I wanted to go out with Dave again. Or if enough time had elapsed, I'd say something like, "Oh yeah, no, I'm meeting Dave for a beer because I haven't spoken to him for ages." And then my wife would go, "Well, no, you saw him last week." "Oh yeah, of course I did, yeah, but I didn't get to speak to him very long." "Well, you were out for hours." "Yeah, but we didn't." And you just kind of get these lies on top of lies. And one of the reasons that sort of prompted me to tell that sort of slightly long-winded story was I was driving yesterday to just go and pop and visit my parents, and I had one of the Old Streets albums on, The Hardest Way to Make an Easy Living. I think it's their third album. And there's a line in one of the songs on that album that says, "If you never tell a lie to her, you never have to remember anything." I might have paraphrased. But as gamblers, that is so incredibly true. We lie, and then we have to remember the lies we told in order to not get discovered. And then we end up lying on top of lies to cover up previous lies. And it becomes this insane memory test where, and you do slip up frequently, and then you have to blag, and then you cover your tracks, and then you get flustered, and then you end up in this perpetual cycle. And one of the biggest reliefs you can have when it comes to gambling recovery is when you finally confess to your addiction, to those people closest to you, all these people around you that you've been lying to. When you finally tell them, then that all goes away. That all goes away because they know you've got this problem, and you can start telling them about the extent of your problem. You can start telling them about the times, and where you really were. And suddenly this ball of lies that you've been carrying around with you, and all this mental strain of trying to cover your tracks and not slip up, is suddenly lifted from your shoulders because you can be honest. And quite often they'll go, that was one of the worst things, ironically, that came off one of those, the good things, was that my wife said she felt so foolish. She felt so stupid because all these times that I've been telling her X, Y, Z, and when I'd actually been gambling, she says, "Well, how did I not know?" Well, she didn't know because as gamblers we become very, very efficient and very prolific liars. It's worrying. Even to this day, I find that I'm very aware, by the way, that this is going to be a long video, but thank you for sticking with me. I even find, even to this day, I try and stop myself, but I do sometimes still tell stupid lies. And quite often I don't know why I've done it, because I'm not covering up anything anymore. You know, occasionally, yes, of course, we all do things. We all spend too long in the pub, lose track of time, forget to pop to the shops and get the cat food or whatever. We all do something. And when we sort of say, oh yeah, I got distracted by whatever. But even to this day, I find myself telling pointless lies, or having to stop myself from telling pointless lies. It almost becomes a compulsion, even when you're not, in a cycle of addiction. Even when you don't need to cover anything up, because you're not doing anything untoward. If someone asks where you've been, or if someone asks, who you've seen, or what you've been up to, your brain, I say your brain, I mean my brain is really what I'm talking about here, immediately sort of jumps into full-blown defensive mode and racks itself to try and think of something to tell the person who's asking. When in reality, you haven't done anything wrong. You could just tell the truth. It's a horrible mental state, and I'm telling you now, like a couple of years or how long it's been sort of free of gambling, that my brain still does that. It still goes to jump through hoops when it doesn't need to, because it's been conditioned to immediately cover whatever it is that I've been doing, because whatever it is I was doing was historically gambling. And that's, like I say, one of the biggest reliefs for me when I actually started talking to people, was then I had the ability to, I didn't have to carry that ball of lies around. And because I wasn't gambling, and because I was beholden a bit to the truth, people were a lot more inquisitive about where I had been, because now they were looking out for me, and they wouldn't be fobbed off with lies. And I became a sort of an extra barrier, really, to my gambling, because before, if no one knows you're gambling, it's not too difficult to excuse a couple of hours here or there where, you might be able to fob them off with an excuse. But if they know you have a problem, they're not going to be fobbed off with that excuse, and they're going to ask more probing questions. And it doesn't matter how good a liar you are. If you are gambling when you say you're in recovery, you will be discovered, and that will cause even more harm and more distrust amongst those closest to you. So the one I think we start telling first, the lie we start telling first when it comes to any sort of gambling habit, any sort of long-term gambling problem, and it's certainly the one I started telling the most often when I was young, when I was still at school, is what happened to your money. I have had more lost wallets. I have had holes in my jeans pocket. I think I might have mentioned it in a previous video that I'd actually torn a hole in the bottom of my pocket of my jeans because I'd lost all my money gambling. But my excuse was, well, there was a hole in the bottom of my pocket and my money must have all fallen out. I disposed of wallets. I just sort of written off the cards, had to order new cards, go through all of that rigmarole just to say that I'd lost my wallet, because actually I'd lost all my money. And then the loans come. Then you have to start going to people and asking to borrow money, not necessarily to gamble, but to bail you out of a hole that you've created yourself by gambling. So you've lost money you needed for bills, or you've lost all your money, and although your bills might be paid, you need to actually eat for the rest of the month. So you then need to talk about or ask for loans from people, and then you have to explain why you want them. And actually, to be fair, one thing you realise when you've stopped gambling is if a time does arise when you need to borrow money from friends or family, you feel less inclined, and you realise how little they care as to why you're borrowing the money. If I went to someone in my family and said, "Oh, can you lend me 500 quid to the end of the month?" I don't think anyone would really ask why that was. I mean, fortunately, I'm not in that position at the moment. But no, I don't think anyone would really ask why that was. But back when you're gambling, you create, before you even approach anyone for a loan, you have to create these wild scenarios in your head. And then, if you're anything like me, you have to then carry through on those scenarios. So if I went to my boss and said, "Oh, can I have an advance on next month's wages?" you know, he'd say yes. Well, actually, to be fair, my boss now probably wouldn't say yes because I spoke to him about my gambling. But by and large, he would have just gone, yeah, no worries, how much do you need? Pay it back next payday, or just take out your wages or whatever. But I would have already had in my head this whole scenario as to why I needed this money. Oh, well, my wife's car's broken down and this happened and then that happened and then this bill came in and I couldn't pay that, so I had to then pay a fine. And by the time you started reeling off all these excuses, he's already agreed to it. But you're so keen to cover up the true reasoning behind the fact you skint before payday that you insist on telling these lies that just aren't required. Why tell the person in the pub that you've lost a tenner in the fruit machine when you've lost 50 quid? It doesn't matter. Tell them they've lost 50 quid. You know, if you just it became, the more I thought about this video, and I've probably sort of done more thinking out loud here than Ed Sheeran, but the more I thought about the video, the more ridiculous I realised the lies I was telling were. The more ridiculous I realised, it was that I was telling these lies when I didn't need to. People didn't care. I didn't need to create these elaborate scenarios in my head. And the more elaborate the scenario you create in your head, the harder it is to remember next time someone asks you about it. So just, it's one of the nicest things. There are some very nice things about quitting gambling, but the fact that I don't have to remember and carry around this big ball of lies just to cover my own tracks, it's a great relief. It's a great weight off my shoulders. And you know, if you're in the early stages of recovery, you'll get that. And the more people you speak to about your problem, the more weight is lifted, until eventually you can be honest with who you were, but also be honest with who you are now and who you want to be, and those people around you can start to look out for you. And of course there will be a reduction in trust from some people. My wife was brilliant. She's certainly stuck by me, and she's been very understanding. I mean, it helped, to be fair, that she's worked with addiction in the past. She's worked for the NHS, and she's worked with addicts in the past, so she does understand it to an extent. So that helped, but that trust was obviously damaged. But it can be rebuilt over time. But it can only be rebuilt over time by you staying true to your word. And that's why I have to fight every day not to tell these pointless white lies. That don't, they're not really white lies, but those pointless lies that my brain automatically generates whenever I'm asked a probing question. Where have you been? Well, actually, I've been at the pub. Oh, okay, that's okay then. Job's a good one. It's been a long one, hasn't it? It wasn't really quite the sort of structured top 5 video that I made the last time, but I hope it's been interesting. Like I say, it was one of my sort of more rambly, introspective ones where I just wanted to talk really about the lies that I've told, and so hopefully that rings true. And what I would say is, if that does ring true, it doesn't make it right. And this is the one thing I've come to realise is owning up to stuff, admitting to stuff, talking about my past problems, talking about the things I've done in the face of addiction doesn't excuse them. Gambling was the reason I did these things. My gambling addiction was the reason I did these things, but it doesn't absolve me of my personal responsibility. It was still me doing these things. It doesn't matter how far in addiction I was, I knew right from wrong. And yes, it was the addiction that was causing me to do these things and behave in certain ways, and ultimately then to lie to cover it up. But whilst this great weight is lifted when you talk about it to the people closest to you, and to an extent to you guys as well, whilst a great weight is lifted, you are still stuck, and so you rightly should be, with that burden from your past, in the same ways you might be stuck with a financial burden from your addiction. I think it's a good reminder of where we've been, and it's a good reminder not to do it again. And in time, in the same way that our finances will repair themselves, our relationships and trust will be rebuilt in most instances, and we can then go on and form stronger, better relationships based on a much more secure grounding. But anyway, I've rambled for nearly 20 minutes. Thank you. If you've got this far, I'm amazed. Thank you. And if you have made it this far, then I'll just say, if you haven't subscribed already, then please do, because knocking on the door of 2,000 subscribers, which is an awesome community to have built, and I'm really, really grateful for everyone here. But I won't go all YouTube on you, and I'll let you go. Stay safe, stay sane, and I'll catch you on the next one. Cheers, guys.